So my name is Dave Stender, and I welcome you today. I work at the University of Hartford, located in West Hartford, Connecticut. I recently started my 2-year term as the Connecticut State Director on the Region 1 NASPA Advisory Board. As we have become more proficient with the use of web-based virtual meetings, I share up front that I have not hosted a webinar with this many people on it before, and I ask for your patience and grace if there are any technical difficulties. We've probably all gotten used to this virtual meeting setting, and occasionally might hear a doorbell ring or a family member pop up in the background, or maybe even a pet who wants to join the conversation, and that's okay. This morning, I'm pleased to share that over 100 people registered to attend the webinar from some 30 institutions. So apparently there's some institutions who are looking to reopen that are outside of Connecticut, and that's okay. We welcome them today from Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and even New York State. Welcome. You may hear today some references to some Connecticut-based organizations or lingo. Essentially, there's a subgroup within our state governor's task force on reopening that's focused on higher education. About 10 days from now, all institutions here in Connecticut are to provide their plans to the state regarding a number of areas on how the campuses will reopen for the upcoming academic year. Before we dive further into today's discussion, I'd like to ask for a pause and observe a moment of silence to acknowledge the events that are happening nationally at this time. Thank you. NASPA Connecticut is proud to assemble this morning a great cast of student affairs leaders from a variety of institutions within the state. Representing both public and private 2- and 4-year institutions, this is just a sample of the great minds working here in the Constitution State. Joining as panelists this morning include Kelly Bird-Danso, Dean of Students, Norwalk Community College in Norwalk, Connecticut. Elise Cretella Mulvihill, Dean of Students, Gateway Community College, located in New Haven, Connecticut. Ellie Doherty, Associate Vice President of Student Affairs and Dean of Students, University of Connecticut at Storrs, Connecticut. Monique Drucker, Vice President, Dean of Students at Quinnipiac University, located in Hamden, Connecticut. Aaron Isaacs, Dean of Students, University of Hartford, located in West Hartford, Connecticut. Will Johnson, Dean of Students, Fairfield University, located in Fairfield, Connecticut. And Tracy Tyree, Vice President for Student Affairs at Southern Connecticut State University, located in New Haven, Connecticut. Again, this is a small sampling of the leadership comprised of the some 44 colleges and universities in the state. And in case you didn't know, there's nearly 130,000 full-time students enrolled here in Connecticut at an institution of higher education. So there's probably just a few considerations to take in place as we look at planning for the fall semester. And now a few housekeeping items. So regarding the use of the Webex event platform, I acknowledge that some folks may not have had an experience prior use of this platform, and so I want to take a moment to describe some of these features to enhance your experience today. You'll probably already notice that as a participant, your camera and audio are deactivated. This may be frustrating at times if you wanted to ask a question verbally or perhaps to be seen. We anticipated a larger group on this call video, and so we deactivated the video for participants to conserve overall bandwidth and to avoid a Brady Bunch style screen with so many boxes that you can't see people. As far as audio, you can still communicate with me and our panelists, and I'll talk about that in 1 second. All right, so right now I draw your attention at this time to the various menu items which probably appear on the far right-hand side of your computer screen. These are expandable areas and include our participants, comments, and Q&A box. In the participants, it might be so long of a list of names that you have to search by name, unless you have maybe a very, very large computer screen. And you'll also notice there's a comments and a Q&A box. As a participant, you can type in to either the comment or the Q&A boxes. I ask that you reserve the comment box for speaking directly with me. Perhaps you might have a technical issue on your end or you can't hear a panelist when they're talking. For the Q&A box, this is where you're invited to type in a question you may have during the conversation today. I'll be monitoring both of these text-based boxes. And one more additional piece on Webex. So Right now, I'm probably very large on your screen with a very large head. If you hover your cursor on that main window where I appear, in the upper right-hand corner, a tray of icons will expand. If you click on the grid view, it'll change the format so you can see all 7 panelists, kind of like Brady Bunch style on that one. And so you can play around with the formatting and select what you'd like. You can't break Webex, so go ahead and do what's best for you. In terms of expectations, I think there's several to point out today and set up front. So there's a variety of folks represented here, both on the panel and as participants. In terms of job responsibility, there's from entry level to vice presidents here. Now, I've already mentioned the diversity among the type of colleges here. Now, I mention this because some topics discussed today may not pertain to your campus, and that's okay. You may not have a question to ask, and that's okay. You might just be here to listen and absorb, or maybe have this in the background while you hammer out that punch list of the to-do list. I also mention all this as there are a wide breadth of topics to discuss today. Some topics you may want panelists to take more time and dive deeper into. The goal of this morning is to address as many topics as possible. This may be more of a scratching of the surface versus a deep dive type of roundtable. I think it is important, though, to reserve a balanced amount of time for questions from all of you towards the end. And we'll play it by ear, but about the last 20 minutes or so, we'll hopefully devote to question and answers. Now, I did devote this Webex platform to be set up for an hour and 15 minutes, just in case we went over the hour minute, although this is advertised as a 60-minute webinar. So not all questions may be answered due to time today. So if I've mastered this platform correctly with some IT training that I've received, I'll be able to save the comments in the Q&A boxes. And this will be used for further professional development and collaborations as we head further into the summer. And depending on how today goes, I plan on offering additional opportunities to come together, whether it's more in this general audience type of webinar or in terms of a virtual meeting where specific functional areas to talk about conversations about how to actually do our various roles this fall can take place with certain restrictions that are probably going to be on our campuses. So Will Johnson approached me about 2 weeks ago asking if NASPA Connecticut could host such a discussion as we're about to have today. And being the excellent idea that it is, I've worked with him and we have a preliminary list of topics to discuss. We've also asked for some input from the panelists about the topics. You will not hear an answer on every topic from every panelist, and that's okay, because again, I recognize that we're here for only about an hour. So now for the meat and potatoes. So some of the topics in no particular order that might be talked about here is the general plan for repopulating campuses, such as academic course modalities, staffing levels, continuation of remote working, plans for testing, contact tracing, student activities and engagement, the use of large gathering areas, such as student centers, dining areas, fitness and rec centers, the education of students about said new procedures and regulations that are in place, policy and enforcement, supporting students affected by COVID-19, such as disability and accessibility considerations, mental health, student insecurities, such as food, housing, finances, on-campus housing, off-campus and commuter populations, the timeline of communication of all this to students. So the game plan looks like this. I'm about to toss this over to Will Johnson for the bulk of today's webinar for the actual roundtable discussion. I'll then come on towards the end to moderate and ask the panelists the questions that you have asked during the roundtable discussion. So, Will, it's all yours.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. Certainly, like many of you who are on this webinar this morning, I approached Dave because I've been sitting in a number of meetings, task force meetings, asking lots of questions, charging us to come with many answers, many of which we don't know at the moment, as to how we're going to reopen our campuses come September. So I thought it would be a really wonderful idea to gather some of the experts in this field from our state to have some discussion about it. And I think, as Dave already alluded to, we don't know all the answers to everything, but I think perhaps with the panelists that we have, you might be able to gain some insight in terms of what's happening across the state, what other campuses in the state of Connecticut are doing, and that may assist you in your own preparation. So to get started, I want to ask a question of each panelist. This is probably the one question that we will ask of everyone. And that is, if you could all just sort of give us a general sense of your current game plan. We all know it's not finalized. What your plan is for repopulating your campus come September. So I'm just going to go down the list that I have in front of me. May not be the same order that you have in front of you in terms of giving a response. So Aaron, you are the first one on my list.
I think with the double, I'm always the first on everybody's list. So sure, absolutely. So, like many other institutions, we have the August 24th is when the state has said we can open up. And so what we're planning on doing is having a drop-off period prior to that for our residential students to come on and get their belongings. A lot of this has to do with getting our facilities ready, at least for our residential population. So right now we're looking at that. We announced that August 15th is when we're going to start that period for these students coming back. So that's part of that phase. The rationale there is similar to, I think QU announced it first, was trying to get as many students who want to come back to campus moved on, knowing that we have this testing expectation coming up on the 24th, and doing that through the week. So we were trying to limit the number of people we would start testing and moving in at that same time. So that's for our residential side. During that week of the 24th, we're looking right now to do our testing as well for our returning students leading up to it. So really we're building up towards those dates that we've set in terms of getting faculty and staff tested and back. Right now, we're looking at, or at least for instruction, we're going to an A/B model for classes. One of the big issues that we have is class space on campus, knowing that we are going to have to socially distance our classrooms. And so right now we have our academic planning group that is looking at all of our spaces on campus. Actually, they were in yesterday measuring how we're going to be able to separate and move students around. So, with the A/B model, some students would be on ground, and then other students would be watching the course from their resident halls or at their houses. So that's kind of our approach and what we're looking at academically. We're also we're exploring weekends as well. Again, knowing that we have to social distance, it's really about space. So we're approaching it from that standpoint. But really, overall, I would say, health and safety is our primary focus right now. We're treating this year as a recovery year. And I think that's helped folks realize and take a little pressure off the normal expectations around enrollment, around generating revenue and things, and understanding that, this year is essentially a loss, and that we have to do what we need to do for students and staff and faculty to be safe. So that's a brief updating kind of how we're approaching this. We have two planning teams. We have an academic one and a residential life and facility team that meets with an overall steering committee that'll approve and look at policies to make sure they're in alignment with the state regulations that are coming out. So,
thanks, Aaron. Elise.
Hi, how are you? So I'll talk a little bit about our plan. So we actually have some students coming back in the summer as part of phase 1A, and that would be our nursing and allied health students, our automotive students, and our manufacturing students all coming back to finish programming. And right now we're in the process of doing a lot of tape marks on the floor for social distancing and putting up plexiglass in order to make it safe for administrative offices to come back. We're looking at the possibility of them coming back at the end of July, early August in order to support enrollment. And our instruction for the fall is looking at a 70-30 for online instruction, so 70% being online. The frustration right now is the classroom sizes. So our 40-person classroom goes down to 12 with 6 feet social distancing. So unfortunately, we're trying to decide who has to be on campus. Like a culinary program has to be on campus, right? So making those decisions, who has to be on campus, and then there's the who wants to be on campus, right? That whole other echelon. So really trying to see, and then what room do we have? And then how can we expand as far as offering classes on Saturdays in order to accommodate that? So that's really where we're at right now with our plans.
Great, thank you. Ellie, what's happening in stores? In Stanford, and Avery Point, and Hartford, and all the other campuses of the University of Connecticut.
Yeah, and what an important point to start on, right? So, you know, UCONN is looking at the responsibility it has to 30,000 students spread out in multiple locations as we take a position on opening, which we have not publicly taken yet. Thank you everybody for going first. So, but here's what we're planning for, and I think, you know, if I could read the tea leaves, this is where we're going, which is, you know, we miss students on campus. We need them on campus to be able to fulfill our role as an institution, and we need to do that safely. So what we're looking at, in addition to the state guidelines, is just how do we decompress a residential system. We have about 12,000 beds on the STORS campus. And for all my Res Life friends out there, we're really dependent on traditional style housing, which is not helpful at containing spread of disease. If we had apartments all over the place, we'd feel a lot better. So if anyone wants to donate $100 million to the university, I'm happy to name a complex after you. But it presents some real challenges in being able to come to a decision point and share that with the student body with confidence. And so I anticipate that's coming very soon, but it's one of the reasons why we've been taking a little bit longer to figure it out. So residentially, we're looking at wanting to have a residential system available to students in the fall, but decompressing it so we can keep the campus running, honestly, throughout the course of the academic term and not have to face an early close. Although we're prepared for that because, as my Connecticut friends know, we have to indicate a plan for shutdown. We are looking medically at the enormous responsibility of testing 20,000 students, and we're preparing to test twice, so at day 1 and day 14. So you're talking about a lot of test acquisition and needing the talent to be able to do those tests. And thankfully, I have a medical team at STORS, but 20,000 tests is a little bit difficult to do with the existing headcount, so we'll need to supplement that. As well as, and this is just a wonderful point that my medical team brought to me that I would share with all of you, we need to be more zealous about immunization compliance because we want to, and we know that it's going to be hard for folks to get immunizations done over the course of the summer. So we are planning to try to compensate for that on our campus as well and increase access to immunizations for students, as well as doing everything but absolutely positively requiring flu vaccines on campus as well. So we plan to not only do the COVID testing, but be prepared in a separate location to ramp up immunizations and to ramp up flu vaccines as well. And then I will mention, you know, we have a lot of colleagues working on classroom capacity, and we would absolutely reduce classroom size to what folks are talking about. We've also asked our faculty to be prepared to be fully online for the fall, so we have an online option for students as well. And then the fourth bucket, which is, I think, the most challenging, but also the most fascinating for all of us, is the community. You know, how does UConn build community when packing a stadium for a football or a basketball game is probably not the best idea? You know, for a school like UConn, we really need to change and understand a sense of us in the fall. And, you know, that's become a real question for us, and one where I look to my friends in the smaller colleges and universities and feel. So that's a real question for us, is how do we build and maintain community while observing social distancing and making sure the student experience isn't one of fear and compliance, right? I don't want students to be walking around campus in the fall afraid all the time. But they do need to walk around campus with a mask on. And so, you know, those changes, those behavioral changes that we need to introduce is something that I really think we need to embrace how hard that is. It's not just putting new roles in place. In many ways, we're redefining the campus experience for our students. And we need to think about how we do that in an affirmative and nurturing way while being very definitive about the change in behavior that needs to happen for us to be safe as a community. So we're teaming with our behavioral health researchers to think about how to do that effectively in the fall. And then there's the Dean of Students element of that too. Like, we're going to enforce it So, and we really have to enforce it in the residence halls in particular. So I'm not interested in policing models for the campus, but we do need to have a tighter rein on our residential population and express very clearly with students, what those standards are and what's at risk if they don't follow them. And so, those have really been the big points for us. We have just moved into implementation mode. And so that's a very uncomfortable place where, we were planning and projecting and conceptualizing, and now we need to get real. And so, testing is probably top of our mind of things that we worry about a great deal, and it's subject to forces greater than a university or any one of us, and needing to reconcile that. So I'm also appreciative that we sit on the state task force, that UCONN has a member there, so that's enabled a lot of communication back and forth as we seek more clarity. And I hope in doing so, we're advancing questions that are of common interest to all of us. And I appreciate the state's responsiveness to how unique residential learning in particular is, but also how that extends for me to areas like our regional campuses and how we care for those students.
Great. Thanks, Ellie. Kelly, what's happening down in Norwalk?
Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. So in Norwalk, similar to what Elise shared at Gateway, we are bringing some students on campus this summer who absolutely have to be on campus. Some of our workforce development programs like CNA and some of those that didn't get a chance to finish because of the hands-on component of their courses in the spring, they will be on early in the summer to try to finish those up. We're moving in mid-July. We'll start bringing our administrative offices that deal mostly with enrollment on a limited basis and sort of a rotating schedule, so we don't have too many people in the office at the same time, and we'll obviously have to limit the number of students that are allowed to come into campus to seek those services. And I think for the fall, similar to what everyone is discussing, we are also looking at putting a large number of classes online. We've already started going through the classrooms, removing desks, removing furniture out in the hallway, so we kind of eliminate the desire for students to kind of sit and hang around. So we're minimizing the classroom size, putting more things online. We're looking at the LRON model, which is sort of what Aaron shared, where half the class is in the actual class, while the other half is sort of watching it remotely at the same time. So exploring those different options. But, it's difficult. And as a community college, building that sense of community is really important. And it's really going to be a tough semester, especially, we're a commuter campus. So we have students who are going to be coming in, some coming in from a distance, and it really is going to be you come and then you leave. And so how do we kind of foster that community vibe in that type of environment is definitely going to be a challenge. But those are some of the things that we are exploring. Everyone will have to wear a mask. The glass has already gone up on many of our offices where we have sort of that counter flow. We call it our main street. So our admissions office, financial aid, the records office, the business office, they all have counters, and all the glass has been put up on all of those counters. We have glass at our security offices, security desks. So, we're getting in place, got to put the arrows and the markers for the 6 feet distance, so that students and staff and faculty can kind of know exactly where they're supposed to stand and where they're going to be. But it's been a challenge. It's a work in progress. I think that we will be ready as we can be come August. But there's obviously a lot of fear from students and from our staff. We have an aging faculty and staff. And so there are many that fall into this high risk group who may not be, coming on campus. And so just dealing with all of those things has been a challenge over the past few months and months to come.
Thanks, Kelly. Monique, my Hamden neighbor. Good morning.
Good morning, greetings. Thank you for having me be part of this. I'm wondering, Ellie, if I could have some of your tea leaves, if you want to share them with all of us, that'd be great. And I will echo, Quinnipiac is really doing pieces of a lot of what we've already heard. I would say that, our priority and our focus is the safety and health of our students, faculty, staff, our community. Then we're looking at our a high quality academic experience, as well as a highly personalized living and learning environment for our students. And to do all that, as we've all acknowledged, in the middle of a pandemic with state guidelines and high expectations is demanding. So we did announce on May 26th that we will be doing a QFlex model, which is a hybrid learning. We will invite our students to come back for an early drop-off period beginning August 10th. So between the August 10th and August 23rd, they will be dropping off their belongings. They can't stay, as we all know, in Connecticut. You can't have anybody residential prior to that unless they're part of a residential pilot program for the summer. We too are doing some pilot programs over the summer that we have submitted to the state. We've submitted our phase 2 already and are pretty close to 1B. I think that's actually going in this afternoon. So we're progressing along with the state guidelines and the requirements. We are looking at synchronous learning. We are currently outfitting our classrooms with increased technology and the ability so that our students will be able to take their class in a staggered method, both in their residence hall or at home if they're commuting or an off-campus student, as well as in the classroom. So we will be, again, as everyone else is trying to do, and adjust to the academic space. We do have 3 campuses, so we're not quite as big as UCONN, but we certainly have the same challenges of trying to do that on multiple campuses and meet the needs of the faculty, staff, and students. Our re-entry into the workforce for our employees is beginning this month as well, and we will be looking at a 50% occupancy for our staff and faculty to be returning. And again, very similar, very strategic, very intentional with who's essential to return, and when they do, the kind of environment that we're returning to. We are steadily and making very good progress on the ground on all 3 campuses with our branding and our social distancing. We have announced today a bunch of our plans for that re-entry. We will be providing all of our students with a branded Quinnipiac mask that they will be required to wear, and all of our faculty and staff will get a couple of those as well. So yes, the plexiglass, the Clorox wipes, the hand sanitizer, the supply chain demands on all of the above, the testing continues to be complicated. I will say though, each day I feel a little bit more encouraged about our ability for access and to be able to administrate it. I think if you asked me this question a month ago, I was just having heart palpitations about how we were going to be able to do this in conjunction and compliance with the state guidelines, but I am feeling more encouraged each day as we go. So that's where we are at Quinnipiac.
Great, thank you, Monique. And my neighbor just to the south of me here in Hamden, Tracy at Southern Connecticut.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm going to try to, because I feel like we need a lot of time for other conversations, I'm going to try to be a little bit focused on the student affairs part of the work. There is a lot that we are still figuring out that I can't even really speak to our classes, because our departments and colleges and schools are still working on that. But we will have students on the ground, online, hybrid, high flex, we're calling it Alflex. I think we will see every mode of delivery academically that can be imagined, to be honest. I will say up front, I think one of our greatest challenges as we are trying to identify our approach and our plans is the balance of who wants to be on campus. I think now that we've been online since March, there has been a growing comfort in that. If we were still on ground and looking ahead to the fall, it would feel very differently to people, I think. But now we have a lot of people, faculty, staff, and students who do not want to come to campus, who do not want to be working in person in the fall. And I think one of our great challenges is how to find that right balance, because our residence halls will be open. I keep posing to our team, what does a value-added residential experience look like and it doesn't look like every office being closed. And yet we will not have a uniform approach. We are evaluating it department by department and office by office. And then the Division of Student Affairs will really look at what is a collective approach to having enough people and offices and spaces on campus to feel like it is a dynamic campus environment. And we are trying to honor the needs of particularly our staff, who are in a variety of places in terms of their comfort and being on campus and what does it take. So right now, each of our departments is evaluating and presenting a plan to how they can be on ground, and then will also be up online or in some kind of virtual experience. We have been given by the system an August 24th opening date, which was not new. That's always been what we name as opening, and that matches the state. The first day of classes is August 26th, and so we will have no on-ground summer programs. We've moved our summer bridge program, our SCOP program, online. That's our major summer program, and it will not be on ground this summer. We do not even necessarily know whether any staff will be back in the summer yet or not. There is not a plan right now for an organized return of staff to campus before we need to be there for the opening of the fall semester. But those decisions definitively haven't been made. We're still waiting for some more guidance to come down in terms of the next phasing from the state and the system level. We will also, thank you, Quinnipiac, we also will have a drop-off period. We believe it will be a week. This is what we're working with right now. We have not announced this. It's not definitive. I know I have some Res Life colleagues on the phone or online, but we will likely have a week drop-off. And then we hope to figure out a move-in across 4 days, but that would require that we get permission to move in a couple of days before that August 24th. But we are concerned that a 2-day move-in with classes starting, we really need to test what does the movement flow look like? How do you get students to comply? And we are concerned that if we don't move until Monday, that we won't be ready by Wednesday. So we are going to play with something like a 4-day window, 2 days for new students, 2 days for returning students, but we don't have permission for that. This is just the model that we're working with. We are looking at around 75% capacity in our residence halls. We have a good stock of traditional halls that we will take singles, doubles, and make them singles. Something like 50% in those buildings, 50% will be singles and 50% will be doubles. We will not force anyone into a double who doesn't want to live with a roommate that they're not familiar with, but we also know that students want to be able to live with roommates. And so we're going to talk more about that, but that's a lot of the discussion we're having right now, because we have to decide the population of our residence halls to be able then to move forward with our residential planning. Our students have not signed up for their rooms yet. That usually would have happened for returning students, but we've held off on that so we can have as good a plan in place. So when they sign up for their spaces, they will be all ready to go. And then in our dining halls and our food facilities, we're still working on that as well, but we will have a 3-tiered approach and be able to kind of move seamlessly between plated and prepared and online ordering and a variety of things. I think we can all agree the only thing that's definitely out is any kind of buffet open dining. But of course, this all has implications for our pricing and our models, and if there will be no unlimited dining. So what does that look like? So those are the discussions we're having right now. We have decided that students will not return after Thanksgiving. So we're in that model of we will send students home for Thanksgiving. And while we may have a need to house a handful or, some of our students who are housing insecure. So I don't want to suggest that we will not have that available, but generally speaking, students will not, and faculty, staff, no. Students. Right now, I think it's just that students will not return after Thanksgiving. The rest will still be worked out in the plan that we're working on. But obviously, there are some opportunities there if students are not returning, that they will finish the semester online. So we are not cutting short the semester. The semester is still the same calendar, but they will finish one week and 1 day of classes and then a week of exams online. excuse me, I'll stop there and then let the questions or the rest of the discussion generate additional detail.
Great, Tracy. I think you raised some really, really great points in there. Particularly, I like the one about staff not returning after Thanksgiving. So,
I'm afraid my staff heard that. We haven't landed there yet.
You said. What I'm going to do right now, because I do want to be mindful of time. I'm sure there's some other questions that may pop up, and panelists, you all have done a great job of giving folks, I think, a wide breadth of what everyone is thinking. I mean, as you were all talking, and I envision myself sitting around the table at our own task force meeting, everything that you all have mentioned are the things that we're talking about. So I think there's some reassurance there that, again, we're all in the same boat, we're having the same conversations, and we're all kind of migrating in very similar directions. There are a couple of things that I perceive to be hot topics that I just want to place on the table. I know a few people have already responded with some of the strategies that their institutions are looking at or planning to use come the fall. So I just want to throw those few out there. And the first one is contact tracing. I know, Elise, you talked a little bit about what Gateway is considering doing and working with the city of New Haven on some contact tracing initiatives. So maybe you might be able to share with everyone else, because to me, that's a big area that we're all really trying to figure out, is how do we do this contact tracing thing? So maybe you might be able to enlighten us a little bit of what Gateway is thinking about.
Yeah, sure. So I think I'm really fortunate because Gateway has a very secure building where we have security on all ends. There's no entrance points that don't have security, and students have to log in with their ID. So we've increased that, and they're not only logging in, but now they're going to log out with their ID in order to be able to really monitor who is in the building when that happens. We kind of did it the opposite on March 13th, a day that I will never forget, right? We had a student that called us and said that she had been on campus and was in the hospital, and they were testing her for COVID-19. So I got the opportunity to work with the City of New Haven Director of Public Health. And basically, they kind of handle that situation with the contact tracing. So they're like, okay, so was she in the building? When was the last time she was in the building? So working in partnership with them, we were able to determine that she hadn't been on the downtown campus in 5 days. And so we were able then to move forward with what their plan was. So I think it's really important that you talk to all of the departments of public health in the area, because they have a process in which to do this. I know I spoke to Southern this morning. We're trying to get a meeting with DPH so we can get in front of this. Obviously from a community college standpoint too, a lot of my students are from the New Haven community. A good majority of them. So we want to know, if they've been in contact. If one of our students becomes positive, we'll be notified by DPH to say a student of yours has tested positive, and then hopefully with our system we'll be able to determine when was the last point of entry, point of exit, where is the class that the student was in, or is it multiple classes, and how many students were in the building during the time that the student was in the building. So that's kind of what we're thinking of. I know I feel bad for my university partners with, hundreds of buildings. We luck out because we have that one building. So we're able to really trace it effectively.
Great. And maybe if one of the panelists who's on a primarily residential campus, I'm thinking about either you, Aaron, you, Monique, you, Ellie, Tracy, just a snapshot of what you all are thinking about or considering in terms of contact tracing for the fall semester.
I might chime in first because I think everyone saw my reaction. I think contact tracing, I now break out in hives when people bring it out. And it's because I think we need to be clear on what it is and whose responsibility it is to do it. And I believe there's many answers to that question. So for residential campuses that have their own medical team, then it's pretty clear to me that we have a responsibility to our students to do contact tracing, and I'm clear on that. What I'm less clear on, and why I really appreciated the comments prior to mine, is this how we coordinate with the state's good work with DTH, and how we don't create redundancies or pretend we're experts in areas where we're not, and instead link into that existing work with DTH. So, I think Elise is exactly right in that, let me sit with my regional public health and figure out what my responsibilities are as an institution, and how that feeds into the state's responsibilities and your regional public health. And these are different actors. And I think that's really important. Otherwise, I worry, particularly when we talk about faculty and staff, are we taking on more than we can? Are we assuming, I think assuming is really the active word there, that we're taking on more than we can in an area where we're not proficient? Or should we be looking to connect with those regional and state experts who are working on this in their own context and linking in appropriately? So obviously we have a role, but is it everything or is it something? I think it's something we need to resolve more for our non-residential campuses than for our residential campuses.
Right. Another question, and again, I just want to try to keep this moving to get some snippets from everybody out here. Question about supporting kind of our vulnerable student populations, right? So students who have been affected by COVID-19 in some way, shape, or form, are students who have disability or accessibility considerations, mental health issues. I know Tracy, I think it was you, Tracy, who brought up students who may have housing insecurities and other type of student insecurities. What are folks thinking about in terms of addressing those populations? Those are kind of some of those deep-rooted issues. They're not sort of at the superficial level that I feel like we're having a lot of conversations about right now. Anybody sort of thinking about what providing accommodations for this group might look like? If you don't have the answer, that's okay too.
I can speak to, some of our, as you know, we had a closed campus in March, and we had a lot of international students that were unable to return home. Lived on our campus, we were able to help them out, and we're still housing a lot of students this summer. We were fortunate enough to work with our advancement team, and we've reached out to some funders and donors who have been very generous in helping students offset costs this summer. So that's one way to look at it. Again, we're looking at our housing stock right now and finding those spaces that we can, students who need those accommodations, where we can put those students in a process, to build for them so they can come forward and say, hey, I have this condition, or I need this resource and help. But it's something that we're looking at right now. I know, we've been able to do a lot with donors, and then talking with administration and reallocating resources to these groups so that we can accommodate them. But I think honestly, part of it is having some honest conversations about, the safety on campus, again, for students who are at high risk, to COVID, having those conversations with them and talking with them about the experience on campus to make sure that they are safe. So, that's just a snippet of kind of where we're at with it.
Great. Two more questions, perhaps, before we jump into opening questions from everyone else. And Ellie, you got into this earlier, but maybe someone else might be able to provide a response. It's that big question about enforcement. Enforcement and, policies and non-compliance, and how are we going to look and address these issues on our campuses? I mean, I know when I'm in a meeting, one of our vice presidents, that's a big thing that he's always asking me about, sort of, how are we going to deal with enforcement of students and making sure they do the right thing? So someone might maybe want to provide a response to what they're thinking or considering to that end, maybe other than Ellie, who gave us a snippet earlier.
I'm happy to chime in. I too will, I sit in these meetings, and I think there are a lot of expectations from many levels of how we're going to do it. And more specifically, Monique, how are you going to do it? What I just keep talking about is this is a shared responsibility. And while I certainly can look at adding violations in our code of conduct. We can look at our handbook. We can look at what we're going to be doing in the residence halls and in collaboration with public safety. I just keep reiterating that this is something that we need to build into our community and a culture and a shared, I think, burden, but responsibility also for all of us to be a part of this. And so I've been having some really great conversations with our student government president. Just met with her again yesterday in terms of trying to cultivate some of that amongst our students so that they can be prepared when they come back, and working with student presidents and student leaders across the university to have their buy-in too, to help us, because we know that we need everybody. If we cannot do this, if we cannot adhere to the guidelines, if we cannot adhere to it, we're not going to be able to stay open. And we all want to do that. They want to be here. We want them here. And so we need everybody's help. So I think we're doing probably what everybody else is doing, is looking at what language would be appropriate to add, what would be appropriate to have our staff address in terms of paraprofessional staff as well as professional staff. But then also, again, what can we do to build that culture and a community for shared responsibility and accountability for all that?
I'd just like to add, Will, the question that's come up that we're not able to answer yet from a faculty member is, what do I do when a student comes into class and doesn't have a mask on? And this is an example of a question that's already very hard for us when faculty are uncomfortable with student behaviors and they don't know how to address them. And so I would just add to what Monique said is, I think we have to think hard about how we're going to work with our faculty in terms of their ability to acknowledge and address and be able to ask for what we need. Are we going to remove students from classes, from the classroom space? Are we going to have masks available so they can put one on if they don't have one handy? Who do you call and when do you call for help with that? We went to a non-smoking campus a few years ago, and we also approached that from a campus community perspective. And it's a much different situation because they became just pockets and somebody needed to go up to a smoker that was standing somewhere. I mean, this is going to be many times more difficult than that. And we found that difficult for people to be comfortable to say to someone else, we're a non-smoking campus, can you please put out that cigarette? And so I know we need to be prepared that this is going to be difficult, and we need to really think about the classroom and the out of class spaces, because I think they might look a little different. Not that the community model isn't the same, but how we're preparing people to respond and be in community with each other feels like there's a lot to be paid attention to.
Thank you, Tracy. I have one more somewhat selfish question that I want to pose to the group, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dave for any additional question from the attendees. And that's the question of off-campus students. And our students who are not living on our campus, not in our residence halls, living in perhaps sometime very close proximity to our campus. And, I'll use Fairfield as an example. We have over 500 students who live in the beach area at Fairfield. And yes, they are students here at Fairfield, but they're living within the larger community, and how that interfaces with our town and gown relationships, how that interfaces with sort of our expectations of their gathering and socializing. Just curious if others have given some additional thought as to how they're looking to approach that particular group or concentration on campus, or this upcoming year, not on campus, but this upcoming year.
So, Will, are you saying, how do you address this, like the commuters?
And certainly, Kelly, certainly commuters are a part of that as well, too. I mean, I think there's this question of, at Norwalk and Gateway, commuters are your students, right? And they're coming and going constantly. But there is that piece with our off-campus students that they come to campus for class and then they leave and they go home, and they're not home, but to their residence, which is in a larger community. And, again, there are one questions of their behavior, but there's also the questions of their interaction with the broader community, the people who they are interfacing with, and, everyone's greatest fear of what they may be contracting off campus and bringing back to our communities. There's this sense that we're all trying to isolate our campuses in some respect. We're trying to curtain off the walls and keep everybody within them. But our commuter students and our off-campus students, they put a little bit of a monkey wrench into that sort of idea. So maybe you can provide some response on commuters, and then anybody else wants to talk about off-campus students as well.
Well, so that is our reality, right? So all of our students are commuter students, many of them taking mass transit to get to the campus. So there are a lot of things to take into consideration. You know, we are thinking about closing the cafeteria. Our libraries are open to the public, and maybe, you know, we have to close those as well. And then, you know, if you close those, then what happens to those students who don't have access to the technology or the internet outside of the building? So there are a lot of things that we are still trying to work out. But yes, that scenario, all of our students are coming from home or wherever they are and could be carrying whatever, you know, with them when they come onto campus. So really trying to reduce the number of people that we have on campus is going to be key, and trying to keep them sort of from engaging the way they normally would, which again kind of affects our bottom line of creating this community culture on campus. But like I said, we have removed all of our soft seating that's around, all of the lounge areas have sort of been cleared out so that we don't have students just kind of lingering and hanging around after after their classes, and then really increasing our maintenance staff and the cleaning that has to happen every single day, all throughout the day, to make sure that we're, you know, being consistent and cleaning behind all of the different groups that are coming in. Because there's no way to isolate on a commuter campus.
Okay, if there are no other comments to that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave and see if there are a couple of questions from participants.
Great. Yeah, thank you everyone so far. This has been a great conversation. So there's a question here about, has anyone on the panel had discussions about guests on campus, either in res halls or at events, and how that would be handled?
So we're not renting out our space to any organizations anymore. So they utilize our big room, all-purpose room, and so we're not allowing any of that because we'll be utilizing that for our student classrooms because our classroom sizes have been reduced so much. And there's talk about not allowing the public access to the library. So we're waiting. Obviously, that's going to be a system decision. So we're waiting for that. And then if there isn't access to the library, then it would be students only coming in the building. So we're kind of hoping for that. So that way we can move forward and really just be the students and the faculty and staff that need to be there. So we can reduce the amount of people in the building.
We do plan to change our visitation policy in our residence halls. I'm sorry I don't have all those details on hand, but we were just talking about before students kind of doubly commit, they've deposited to live in the residence halls, but when they sign up, they're doubly committing to that. And we need them to commit to what our normal for the fall will be. And one of those facets will be either, I'm not sure whether we're going to land on no non-university visitors, even how to think about, because we are a large commuter institution, so our commuting students visiting our residence halls, I'm sorry, I can't share exactly where we've landed, but we will modify those and we will communicate all of those new we're changing our contract with students in terms of their then understanding what those new policies will be, and then asking them to commit to that. And we, I believe, are pretty close to the place that if they don't want to still live on campus because they don't like sort of the new expectations, then we will let them out of their contract at this point. We also, of course, are waiting to see where classes fall because we think students will make their residential decisions in part based on what their class experience looks like, and they don't know that yet either. But we will limit visitation in the halls.
And for those folks who might have gotten on the call a little bit later, I did schedule this Webex event in terms of the actual software to be running up until 12:15 p.m. Eastern today. Although I did advertised this as a 60-minute webinar. And so as we'll go a little bit over in terms of time. So in terms of panelists, if you need to duck out in terms of you signed up for 60 minutes and we're going a little bit longer than that, that's fine. I'm just going to squeeze a few more questions, but otherwise the questions will be saved and I know who asked it. So I'll be able to email out to the panelists and maybe collect an answer that way. Let's see here. In terms of fairness and balance, there's a question about determining which staff and faculty will be on campus versus working remotely. How will you assess vulnerabilities? And the person also thanks you for your time and coming up here today.
So I think I'll go first, just from a division standpoint. I can't really say what we're doing with the faculty side of the house, but from a division standpoint, when I had my directors come up with their plans, I said to them, everybody 2 days on, 3 days off, or 2 days on with full coverage. So we tried to stay consistent with the division messaging that everybody would be in for at least 2 days a week. So that way it's consistent and fair. I'm in a unionized environment, so I think that also plays, you know, as far as consistency and fairness. So that's what we've come up with. I know they're talking about 1 week on, 1 week off. I'm kind of fighting against that because I feel like childcare will become a problem. It may help in the cleaning, but the childcare issue, I don't know anyone who's going to watch, you know, someone's child for every other week. So we're trying to move forward with that hybrid 2 days on.
If I could jump in, Dave, I know I've probably been asking all of the questions and not giving responses, so I'll share a little bit from a Fairfield perspective. Certainly we want to start the process of repopulating our campus and bringing staff back into to be present on our campus. But one of the things that we recognize, and I think probably everybody's recognized to a degree, is that we have a tremendous ability to work remotely right now and still get the job done. Now, we certainly did not experience that with, in our case, 4,000 students on campus, but it's certainly using Webex, Teams, or Zoom, we know that we can still be productive. So it really is raising some questions, perhaps, of how often people need to be in, how many people need to be in. There's still these questions of campus density that we need to address. I think, as Elise just mentioned, I've talked to my staff about even as much as week on, week off, right, in order to maintain some sort of balance, right, at least as we're coming back on board. But we're going to have to continue to look at it closely. We're going to have to evaluate it. We're certainly not in a unionized environment, so we don't have to worry about that so much. But I think the point about fairness, in terms of who's able to work remotely and who cannot, that's, I think, is an important question, as I think I raised in our staff meeting this past week. Supervisors are different. I may be a little more flexible and free to allow my staff to work remotely. There may be another department head or manager who has people doing similar jobs, but has this expectation that people need to be present. So I think that's going to require an edict from, above my pay grade, I think, to talk about at least what's that baseline that everyone needs to consider in terms of remote working.
I've also been thinking a lot about how do we relieve staff. So we have some, I think of my residential team, I think of my medical team, that they're living on campus, they're on call, we've been asking a lot of them. And so are there ways for institutions, and I am also highly unionized, so this is it's an easier question to ask than to answer, where we could take staff who are perhaps more remote right now but willing and start swapping folks around so we can just respond to the degree of stress that our staff are working with as well, and have that be part of the conversation on remote versus in-present work.
Great. And again, we're just going to go for a few more minutes. So I appreciate everyone's time. There was a question that was asked. I got it via email, actually. So I'll sneak this one in. In terms of, there was some discussion about doubles and singles. So it's more for the residential populations here. In terms of what are folks' thoughts and what's being talked about in terms of, is everything a single? Like if it's a double, how do you decide what's a double? Is it purely on the student deciding that? I think Tracy, you might have alluded to a little bit of that in your conversation, but in terms of like living units, I think that was the term that was thrown about here. Just wanted to, household unit housing. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
We're discovering it's really important that the type of housing matters on how you answer that question. So I am grateful to the extended conversations I have had where we are looking at ground plans of buildings that were built a really, really long time ago, and the talent we have at UConn to look at that. But I think one of the challenges with what we were being asked is that we couldn't answer the question the same way. And so what I mean by that is, show me an X% occupancy model. Well, I can actually show you that I can answer that question, but it's a different and perhaps more effective way to say within what living accommodation can you occupy, right? So within an apartment setting, we're a lot more comfortable putting 2 in a room and going to full, right? Because for us, the bathrooms drive everything, which I think was very helpful to the state for giving us more guidance there. That confidence, for me, decreases dramatically when you're looking at a double loaded corridor and 40 people to a bathroom, right? And so, I am finding that I have very different recommendations on the best occupancy model based on the type of housing we are talking about. And I have found it very helpful to kind of let the question evolve a little bit, to start talking about type of housing, role of bathrooms, get input from our medical teams and CDC guidance. There's also, their professional association also released a report that I think is very helpful. And then you can better answer the question of what's a single and what's a double. Nothing's a triple in my world right now. So I'd offer maybe reframing the question a little bit to how we can best model and answer it to our leadership.
Great. Thank you very much. Can people please share plans for large gathering spaces, such as student unions? Any ideas about student organization meetings/events?
And I would add recreation complexes to that question as well, too.
I would say on our end, that's still evolving as we watch to see what the guidelines from the state are in terms of gatherings. And as we know, our governor just released some newer guidelines about large gatherings and how many people. We've gone from 10 to 25 to 50, to 150 now for an outdoor graduation. So I think we're all just eager to see what that might look like as the month progresses. And so for us, that's what I'm actually chairing a subcommittee for that particular one. And I have yet to actually convene too much of that because I'm just hopeful and anticipatory of some of those state guidelines that really will dictate it. We certainly can plan the 6 feet apart and how many, but that number that the state gives us is going to inform how we do that when we do it. I will say from our perspective, when we did the QFlex model, just like many of the schools here, we really looked at how do we get all of the learning and the instruction done and preserve some time without trying to go into the weekends, preserve some time for the student experience and for groups, because we will need to kind of bleed into some other non-traditional academic spaces to hold classes in order to do it. And so I was very vocal in trying to make sure that we preserve some time and space to be able to do that. That being said, I think it's all going to be dictated on the numbers that is guided by our state.
Great. Thank you. A question, can folks, there was a little bit of a reference regarding, say, like dining. Can folks weigh in a bit more in terms of what's that going to look like on college campuses?
Yeah, it looks to us, and I can't remember exactly who it was. It may have been Tracy, Ellie, Monique, I know it was one of the three of you, who talked a little bit about the grab and go scenarios, the order ahead scenarios. That's really kind of the piece that I think is going to be pushed on our campus. I think similar to the question about space and physical distancing. We also have that question of, family unit and family dynamic that comes into play. How many people might be able to sit in one space and have a meal. Some of this may be driven by what's happening in the larger food services world and restaurants and those sorts of things in terms of how many people can gather and have a meal at the same time. That's sort of what I think we're anticipating to a certain degree, because for our residential campuses, and I'm sure for our community colleges as well, and I think this is just sort of human nature as well, breaking bread with one another is a huge part of developing community. So we're going to do all that we can to try to make sure that those opportunities remain in place for our student body, moving forward.
We are, I will add, we are preparing, because I had mentioned it earlier, we are putting things on tables to put acrylic or plexiglass barriers up sort of in, so students can sit at a table together, not in great density, but in 2s or 4s, where they can eat across from each other, but with a piece of plastic, if you will, in between them, and then spreading our tables apart. So we will not be able to accommodate everyone. We will certainly be prepared for other approaches, but if the conditions allow, and I think that's important, and we will have to keep assessing that, we do hope to have some in-person dining because, as Will said, it is such a critical part of our sense of community. And if they're not eating there, they're going to go other places and eat like close to each other. They're gonna do some of their own things. So if we can create ways they can eat in community together safely, we think that that's an important approach.
Thank you. So this whole entire platform is going to shut down in like 4 minutes. I'm going to try and squeeze one more question in here, and I do have a little bit of a blurb to close things out. In terms of the details on the testing plan, whether it's Quinnipiac or maybe UCONN or UHart weighing in on this, in terms of where do you put the students while you're waiting for the results to come in? Is there like an isolation? What's going on with that when they first come back on campus?
Right now, we're working with our healthcare partner, Hartford Healthcare, to help do our testing. And the testing that they've talked about right now is a 48 to 72 hour turnaround. So we were talking about housing those students in quarantine in those spaces while we waited for those results. The way things are going right now, we know every week there's an update in terms of the medical testing. We're really hoping for a rapid test to be ready to go. The logistics of having to do testing and moving are daunting. So, really hoping that will be made available. We're still working through what that quarantine may look like, particularly knowing that, if students come to campus and they're waiting for 48 hours in the dorms and they could be positive, what is that doing to that community and the spread? So we have not finalized any of that. That's kind of what we're talking about right now, having 2 different test sites, one for residential, one for commuter, when students come back. But really, it's going to depend upon, if we're able to come up with a rapid test. I really think that's going to change a lot in terms of how we approach this. So waiting and seeing on that.
I'll just add us all to think about the rate of false positives is a concern for us. So we are hoping to achieve an earlier move-in with a 14-day quarantine while we are testing. And part of that is just we can't test 20,000 students quickly. But we're kind of hoping to address this from 2 angles. So then we have greater confidence in the health of the community at the start of classes. So that's a focus for us, is can we do a 14-day quarantine as well as do the testing to sort of back each other up on our confidence on the health of our students.
Great. All right. And I think with that, I'm going to have to wrap this up. And I really do thank the panelists for their time and sharing their thoughts. I'll send out an email to everyone who registered with some other information that I was going to talk about now. But I do draw your attention. There's going to be NASPA Region 1 is working on another web-based session related to race and how to support our students and staff and community. So it's important that you make sure your profile within NASPA is set up where you select what information you'd like to receive. For instance, I can email all of the folks who have Connecticut checked off that they work in Connecticut. That's how you receive emails from me in terms of this being the state director. And so I hope you all enjoy the rest of your Thursday. I think we deserve a nice lunch break and reprieve from all this talk about planning. And I hope you all can take some time and just recharge and get ready for the fall. So thank you again for attending today's roundtable discussion. Goodbye.